Hello and welcome to this Year 10 and Year 11 webinar, Shakespeare webinar on Macbeth. Now, this is a specific assignment looking at Macduff's character in Act 4, Scene 3. So the question that we're looking at is, to what extent does Shakespeare present Macduff as a powerful character in this extract from Act 4, Scene 3? There are 3 learning aims that we have. So by the end of the session, we would have been considering genre, audience and purpose. You would have been looking at how to comment on the effects of language and language features and how to embed and explain quotations. Now, in your mark scheme and for your teacher assessed grades, your centre assessed grades or CAGs, you'll be looking at this assessment scheme. So you have 6 different levels, and to achieve a grade 5 or above, you need to make sure that you are working at level 4 or above. Now, what does that mean? It means that you understand the task and the text, so you really understand that this is all about Macduff and is he powerful in this particular extract, and can you relate it to the text as a whole? It says it's a sustained response. That means you're not flitting anywhere else. You're really thinking about the power of Macduff at this point in the play and elsewhere. You're really treating the text as a construct or a deliberate construction. That means you understand that Macduff isn't actually a character. Shakespeare's using him to explore and represent different ideas. You explain the effect of the language of the writer's deliberate choices, so explaining about language and structure, and we'll look at that in more detail. You use references effectively to support your point, and we'll look at embedding quotations. You show relevant understanding of context, and we're going to look at genre in terms of our context today, and then you understand themes and ideas and that are linked to abstract terms, so themes and the ideas behind it. So in order to secure your grade 5, you need to make sure that you're looking at all those different aspects, and we'll be considering all those aspects today so that you will feel secure when you finish this webinar that you can write this assignment and achieve a grade 5 at least. Now, first thing we need to talk about in terms of understanding the bigger picture is the genre. Macbeth, as you will know, is a tragedy, and Macbeth, the eponymous hero, the hero who is named after the play, is a tragic hero. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's a little bit like Superman and Kryptonite. He's really strong, he's really powerful, but he has a weakness, and that weakness could lead him to death. So Macbeth is a tragic hero. He's a highborn character who has a weakness that leads to his pride. He makes a series of wrong decisions. His fortune is reversed. He meets an arch enemy, but he realizes too late that he can't win, and he ends up dead. Now, Macduff is the focus of this assignment, and Macduff, to some extent, could be seen as a tragic hero because he is a highborn character. He's very noble, he's very respected, he's a brave warrior, but he has a weakness. He runs away. So he's a nobleman, but he runs away. As soon as Macbeth takes the throne in Scotland, Macbeth runs away. And so we can see his selfishness, his hubris or his pride that leads him to England and to neglect his family. Now, disaster strikes. This is a turning point, a reversal of fortune, or peripeteia. His family is murdered, and he realizes that the person who ordered the execution was his arch rival or nemesis, Macbeth. However, unlike Macbeth, he realizes his mistake and he makes amends. So I think it's really important for you to understand, in terms of Macduff's character, he has weaknesses, he has arrogance, he's negligent, disaster strikes for him, he has a rival, and yet he makes mistakes, but he tries to make amends. Now, what about the audience in all of this? Well, we are taken on a roller coaster adventure. You will very much recognize, I imagine, the narrative arc where you have the exposition, you introduce the characters, the rising actions when things are difficult, and then the turning point followed by the resolution where things become easier. For most people, not tragic heroes, This is like going up a hill, things are difficult, and the turning point, you can come down with ease. But tragic heroes kind of roller coaster journey, and Macduff partly looks as if he's a tragic hero. He doesn't end up dead though. He has a weakness, he has many weaknesses. His turning point is really important, but the beginning bit looks as if it's easier than the end bit. So Macduff is actually part of the resolution, and Act 4 is part where we start finding solutions and we start finding answers. It's the beginning of the downfall for Macbeth, and Macduff is one of the important key factors that is able to bring Macbeth to justice. Now, it's really important that we understand that he's not a character, not a real character in real life. Shakespeare's used him. Why? Well, Shakespeare uses Macduff to really think about leadership. What is the quality of good leaders? Leaders are powerful, and we can see a lot of Macduff's power in Act 4, Scene 3 in this scene. He also looks at social order. What happens when you have poor leaders? What happens when leaders and kings are weak? And we can see that for Macduff running away to England when he should have been in Scotland, defending his country, defending his family, and all the social consequences of weaknesses in leadership. Then Shakespeare very much uses Macduff to represent patriotism. Although he runs away from Scotland, he still has that love and loyalty for his country. And obviously with Malcolm, they lead that rebellion back, and they lead the fight back to regain Scotland and grapple it from the bloody claws of Macbeth. Macduff also represents this key idea of temptation, of greed. And this scene in particular, it's the temptation scene. Malcolm is tempting Macduff to come to the dark side, almost like we have in Star Wars with Luke and the Darth Vader tempting him to come to the dark side. But Macduff shows his moral power by standing firm and not giving in to greed and sin and evil. Shakespeare also uses the whole play to look at guilt and sorrow, mainly through the character of Lady Macbeth, who was the catalyst at the beginning, and yet remember, she crumbles at the end. But we can also see that guilt, the sorrow and regret in Macduff, and his character really represents ideas of sorrow and regret, and he uses that guilt to fight back. And then finally, another key idea that Shakespeare is exploring through Macbeth and through Macduff's character is about justice. Kings who should lead a country with fairness, and punishment when the right person should be on the throne. And Macduff, because he's part of the resolution, he brings justice, he brings punishment, he brings fairness, and he's able to put Malcolm, the right person, on the throne. Right, when we're looking at this scene, we're going to look at the extract from Act 4, Scene 3, and really examine, is Macduff powerful? But we need to not just describe the scene. We could say, this happens in the scene, and then this happens, and then this happens. That's descriptive. You would not get more than a level 3, maybe a level 2, if your language and your analysis is descriptive. But when you start talking about the effects of language, the why, then that's where all the marks are. So these are some key words that could help you to make sure that you're on track to really talk about effects. So you might say, this shows. I know that a lot of teachers like myself are allergic to that word. Don't say shows when you can have other words like this suggests, this implies, this indicates, this conveys, this depicts, this signifies, this illustrates, this exemplifies. So this gives an example of, this highlights, this alludes, it subtly shows us, insinuates and intimates, this subtly shows us, infers that this is what's happening. So this is explaining why Shakespeare is using this word, or why Shakespeare's using this phrase, what it's really showing about Macduff and his power. Okay, let's have a look at the actual scene. This is from Act 4, Scene 3. This is the temptation scene. Malcolm is pretending to be very evil, and greedy. He's trying to test Macduff. So he says at the beginning of the scene that if he becomes king, he will be greedy, he will be vicious, he will be brutal and destructive. And Macduff reacts very strongly to this to show that he will not be tempted. So this is how the scene goes. Malcolm says, I have none. The king becoming graces as justice, verity, temperance, stableness, bounty, perseverance, mercy, lowliness, devotion, patience, courage, fortitude. I have no relish in them, but abound in the division of each several crime, acting it many ways. Nay, had I power, I should pour the sweet milk of concord into hell, uproar the universal peace, confound all unity on earth. Macduff. Oh, Scotland, Scotland. Malcolm. If such a one be fit to govern, speak. I am as I have spoken. Macduff. Fit to govern? No, not fit to live. Oh, nation miserable, with an untitled tyrant, bloody sceptred, when shalt thou see thou wholesome days again, since that the truest issue of thy throne by his own interdiction stands accursed, and does blaspheme his breed? Thy royal father was a most sainted king. The queen that bore thee oftener upon her knees than at her feet died every day she lived. Fare thee well. These evils thou repeatest upon thyself have banished me from Scotland. Oh, my breast, my hope ends here. So we're answering the question, is Macduff a powerful character? Well, Malcolm is tempting him. Malcolm is saying here, you can see where I'm pointing to number one, but I don't have any kingly graces, but this is what I'm like. So the repetition of that coordinating conjunction, but is contrasting Malcolm's destructive nature with what is supposed to be the true nature of a king. It's really emphasizing his evil mind. So why does Macduff have to be powerful? Because he's confronted with evil and he's confronted with temptation. Malcolm, the rightful heir of the throne, is saying, will you join me in my quest for evil and war? Many people would give in and say, well, he's the rightful king. I'm a good warrior. It's better than Macduff. I'm in. But Macduff shows that he is powerful. So you can see where I've pointed at number 2, there's a long list. First list is all about the virtues. The next list is all about the vices. So it's contrasting what Malcolm would do. Instead of being a public figure who would defend justice, he wants his private vices and he wants his individual needs to be satisfied when he becomes king. So can you see why Macduff has to be powerful? Because he's faced with temptation. He's faced with evil, he thinks. He doesn't realize that Malcolm is testing him. Then Malcolm says the language becomes diabolical. He talks about hell. Malcolm depicts himself as a fiend to exaggerate his damaging influence. If I were on this throne, this is the kind of destruction and hell that I would cause. Then you can see Macduff's strength. He says, oh, Scotland, Scotland. He doesn't think about himself. So the repetition and the exclamatory sentences show this deep-seated patriotism, his concern for his country's welfare before his own. And then Malcolm says, am I fit to govern? He says, fit to govern, no, not to live. So the parallelism, the fact that he's echoing Duncan's words, fit to govern, is showing that disgust. He's dismissing him. Although he's the rightful heir, he's saying he's not the right person to be on the throne because he doesn't have these virtues of selflessness. And then you can see how Macduff personifies Scotland. He says, "O nation miserable." And the personification really highlights Scotland as a sickly patient through this rhetorical question, when shalt thou see thy wholesome days again? When will healing come to you? He thinks that Malcolm is a disease that will cripple and injure this already suffering land. And he says it directly to his face. You can see his strength, the strength of his words. And then he says, you do blaspheme. He, speaking in the third person first before he switches to second person, blaspheme his breed. So this alliteration presents Malcolm as a traitor. He is insulting the whole of Scotland, his breed. He's not fit to be called Scottish, is what he's saying here. So can you see the power of his patriotism, his selflessness, his desire to see his country's welfare, to see his country whole, and the fact that he rejects evil and temptation? He's being powerful here. And then he talks about the old king being saintly, but also he talks about the old queen. She was oftener on her knees than on her feet. So it's showing that she is religious. She was devoted. She was prayerful. And he's using this comparison really to shame Malcolm, to say that your parents, your descendants were godly, they were spiritual. And why have you become so evil? So can you see his power? He's confronting him directly now and really shaming him to change his mind. However, this is what he says: fare thee well, thy hope ends here. These are monosyllabic words. How many syllables? Fare thee well. One syllable in each word. Thy hope ends here. This is final and this is hopeless. So although he's strong in terms of defending his country and confronting Malcolm without hesitation, he doesn't do anything. He's running away again. He says these evils have banished him from Scotland. He's running away again. So he's going to run away from England now. Where's he going to? So we can see that although he's powerful in his words, he's not powerful in his actions. Right, so what would our response look like? It would look something like this. You'd be embedding the quotations and explaining what they show, what they indicate, what they mirror, what they reveal, what they emphasize, and what they highlight. So my example is something like this. Shakespeare partly presents Macduff as a powerful character, because although his words are powerful, his actions are not. So I've answered the question: has Shakespeare presented him as a powerful character? To what extent? Well, partly. So I would say that his use of the exclamatory sentence, oh, Scotland, Scotland, shows Macduff's deep-seated patriotism and his concern for his country's welfare. So can you see how I've embedded those quotations there and I've explained it using words like show and indicate? I also have said his first response is for Scotland rather than himself, showing an understanding that if leaders seek to uproar peace, countries will never see wholesome days. So you can see how I've embedded those quotations. And then I'm explaining it. These words are powerful as they remind Malcolm that sacrifice, not selfishness, defines a good leader. So I've used these embedded quotations. I've explained them: shows, indicates, reminds, and I've explained why they indicate, why they show his power, and referring back to the question again and again. Okay, let's look at the next paragraph. Shakespeare uses parallelism where Macduff mirrors and echoes Malcolm's words. Fit to govern indicates disgust. So you can see that I've tried to use words that explain the effect, and I've also used fit to govern, embedding, bringing the quotations in rather than having them separate. It's clear that the idea is ridiculous, as the health and well-being of the country is miserable enough in the hands of an untitled tyrant, Macbeth. But if the legitimate ruler wishes to confound all unity, then the country is truly accursed. Macduff's words are powerful as they reveal him as a character who has no hesitation in confronting Malcolm's interdiction, his declaration. So can you see how I've used those words, untitled tyrant? I've used the fact that he wants to confound all unity, the fact that the country's truly accursed. I've included them in my own analysis. Finally, have a look at the final paragraph. Finally, Malcolm's monosyllabic words at the end of the speech, "Thy hope ends here," creates a feeling of finality and hopelessness. Perhaps this shows weakness rather than power at this point. Macduff would rather say farewell to his beloved country rather than fighting. Overall, this highlights Macduff's weakness. In avoiding physical confrontation, Shakespeare shows that Macduff, despite his powerful words, is in fact weak. So I've come to a conclusion using the explanation and using the embedded quotations. Okay, right. I hope that you now feel that if you were to tackle this assignment, looking at Act 4, Scene 3, to what extent is Macduff presented as a powerful character, you could think about it. You'd think about the fact that this is a hero who could have been a tragic hero like Macduff, but he recognized the weaknesses of his ways later on. You talk about the fact that Macduff is part of the resolution. He brings Macbeth down. You look at the fact that Shakespeare, through Macduff, is exploring issues of leadership and guilt and courage, and the fact that you're really looking closely at this scene. I hope that this has helped you. Thank you for joining me, and see you next time.